All right, it's October the 2nd, 2025. I want to go over some news tonight that's been going on. I kind of skipped over this when I did do some news here over the past few days. I didn't do it live here yesterday, nor the day before. But the first thing I want to talk about, these FBI agents. Kash Patel said that there were 274 plainclothes FBI agents at the protests on January 6th. What he did not clarify was that the 274 plainclothes FBI agents were in response to the breach on the Capitol. He's not saying that there were 274 FBI agents that were integrated into the protesters as a part of an incitement or a move to help them to get into the Capitol or anything like that. The only thing he was saying is that these people were there as a response to the protesters breaching the building. Now, most likely, if there were any plainclothes operatives for the DOD in the protests that were integrated amongst the people that were inciting the riot, which was in a lot of cases here, just some grandmas and some older people and walking through the velvet ropes inside of the Capitol building, or some guy dressed up like a shaman doing a prayer. So, not much of a riot, but yet it was called an insurrection. So, in any case, if there were DOD operatives, they were likely from DHS, not going to be from the FBI, because the FBI was going to do the investigation afterward. So highly likely there were not FBI agents, or there were not very many FBI agents integrated in amongst the protesters prior to the breach of the Capitol. Now, when they moved from the ellipse to the Capitol, I believe that there were definitely provocateurs that were integrated within the protesters that were utilized to incite them into a riot and to break into the Capitol and help them do that. But we don't have any evidence exactly who those people were in relationship to the DOD or DHS in any specific way. We just have a lot of conjecture, although there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that would lead us to believe that that's a possibility, or it was a good possibility that it happened, because the people that were there on that day, they were there to protest the election, to make their voices known to the people that were in the Senate that were about to certify the election, that they were protesting against that certification. However, the Senate was just not there that day to certify the election. They were actually going to vote to do a 10-day investigation into the election, which is what the riot actually prevented from happening, because afterwards they just went in. They did not talk about any of the fraud or anything was involved in the 2020 election, and they went ahead and just certified the election, and there was no investigation, which was apparently agreed upon beforehand, that they were going to do this vote on an investigation into the 2020 election. And I believe that the provocateurs that were integrated within the protesters there that helped to incite the riot, and I believe there were obviously independent protesters there, or independent people there that were used as provocateurs or were provocateurs themselves, like Antifa or other groups that were anti-right-wing groups that were there, just anti-Trump groups that were integrated within the protesters to incite a riot, to get them to break into the Capitol. But I believe that if there was anybody there from DOD, DHS, it was to get them to break into the Capitol, prevent them from voting on an investigation into the fraud that was perpetrated during the 2020 election, which was mostly from mail-in voting. And anybody that's actually looked at the statistics knows there were, I want to say it was like 7 or 8 million more voters on the Democrat side that had ever voted in any other election in the history of the presidency of the United States. So, yes, that corpse of a man, Joe Biden, got more votes than anybody in the history of the presidency. Anybody that believes that there was no fraud is going to have something wrong with their head anyway. But there were provocateurs that were there. They were there to stop that fraud investigation. They didn't want any legitimate investigation into the 2020 election by the government to reveal or expose the fraud that had been perpetrated on the American people. That's all I want to say about that. I mean, Kash Patel, he should have clearly stated that from the very beginning, but he did not. So there was a lot of people out there, and I think that's why the news about that kind of just faded away pretty quickly, is because even though, yes, Christopher Wray did go up in front of Congress and say repeatedly there were no FBI agents within the protest group, that doesn't actually say that he was committing perjury, because Those FBI agents, by Kash Patel's own words, showed up after the breach of the Capitol. They were there in response. So, all right. Anyway, moving on from that. Government shutdown. So, now what do we got? We got a continuing resolution that keeps being rejected by the Democrats because we won't give billions and billions of dollars in health care benefits to illegal immigrants. So they're just going to shut down the government. Now they're going on CNN and obviously they're going on other news networks saying that it's the Republicans, they're stopping us from doing this. Or the Republicans are saying, well, they control Congress. In this case, the continuing resolution needs a supermajority vote. So there has to be 60 people that vote yes on this continuing resolution. Otherwise, it does not get passed. Now, at the very last minute, I believe this was already going to happen anyway. The first resolution that was voted on was voted down 44 to 48. That was a Republican resolution. The Democrat resolution actually got more votes. It was 47-45. But either way, that was never ever going to come to pass. There was never going to be a supermajority vote on either of those two resolutions to get them to pass. But the one that's in there right now that's from the Republicans got voted on recently, and it was 55 to 45. So there are cracks here. They are starting to relent. And what Trump is going to do, he's already looking at cutting the budgets on several Democratic, and I don't want to say they're Democratic programs. These are programs that are just primarily going to affect Democratic voters. So it's the Democratic base that's actually going to receive the most hit, or is going to get the biggest hit on this if Trump cuts these programs. They're programs like, well, this one's not specifically to that, but the EPA, HUD, the Department of Education, National Science, NOAA. So these departments, though, specifically with HUD, and I believe there's some other benefits involved. Let me look and see what I got here on this one. Health and Human Services, another one. That's another one that's looking to get their budget cut due to this continuing resolution not being passed. So Trump is using his ability to cut the budgets of these programs himself in relation to the reasoning why, the reason Trump is going to cut the budgets here is because Chuck Schumer is withholding the rest of the votes to get this continuing resolution passed. So the government, even though it's in a shutdown now, is not going to be able to be open for service to the American people. I think there are cracks here. I think this might last for another week or so. They want to get some more headlines out of it. But in truth, eventually they're going to have to fold. And the Republicans are just not going to fold on this end. We're not going to give billions and billions of more dollars to these illegal immigrants for their health care benefits. We've already spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on them already. And we continue to, and will continue to do so. But we're not going to do so in the form of health care benefits. If there's going to be anything else that gets passed by the Republicans through the Trump administration at all here, it's going to be billions of dollars to send them back to their home country. That's what I'm looking at here, and I believe that that's where they're standing on this at the moment. So now that I got through that one with a little bit of a hiccup, but moving on to Tyler Robinson news. So there's a lot of interesting things going on that are not necessarily related directly to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And what I mean by that is this. Tyler Robinson received he received a public defender for his attorney because his parents stated that they were not going to help fund him. All they did have money. They went into basically like a witness protection program for themselves so that they wouldn't be attacked during this period of time. And I believe that the father had also stated that they were not going to actually fund Tyler Robinson's defense in any way. And they have not. So he has a public defender. However, there is a woman named Elizabeth Lane who is an independent journalist. And she decided she wanted to get close to this case so she could, track it. Now, she used the word control. Now, I don't know exactly what she meant by that. It was on the Redacted podcast, if you want to look it up. But she wanted to get close to Tyler Robinson, and she wanted to get close to this case. And how she was going to do that was she was going to look for a pro bono attorney for Tyler Robinson so that he did not just have a district attorney, or the district attorney could be replaced by another attorney. So in the process of doing this, she's calling around to these different groups to see if they would do pro bono work for Tyler Robinson in this case. And she got a yes. So after she got the yes, they were actually looking for an attorney to work through this group pro bono. And they had a famous lawyer out of New York. Now, she did not name this person, but she said that he's a well-known attorney out of New York that actually agreed to work this case pro bono. Now, attorneys or lawyers cannot go solicit him in this case to be his attorney. So she, Elizabeth Lane, being she, called around to some local big law firms in and around Orem, Utah. And she was asking them what was the best way to approach this so that she could get this pro bono group and pro bono attorney to come in there and be an advocate or the attorney for Tyler Robinson. And apparently this group just blew up on her and said that Gregory Skordas, who was the prosecutor in the case on September 16th for Orem, so he was actually the prosecutor, and that he was going to be the one to determine who Tyler Robinson's lawyer was. Now, she didn't specifically state if this was he was going to decide who his lawyer was in respect to anything outside of the public defender, which is actually what I think they meant. But it still sounded kind of weird. He was going to get to pick his own opponent. Now, what Elizabeth Lane did not know, and I'm assuming that she did not know this, otherwise I don't think she would have done it, but two attorneys, Michael Burt and Richard Novak, both from California. One of them, Burt, used to worked on the Lyle Menendez case in the double murder of his parents in 1993, and that was with his brother. These are the Menendez brothers, if anybody remembers that case. So he's a seasoned attorney. He's got 50 years as being a defense attorney, and Richard Novak, I believe he started in 1990, was what it said. So this guy's got 35 years anyway. These guys are going to be helping his public defender in this case. It just seemed kind of odd, though, that when she called this local law firm, that they told her that Gregory Skordas, again, who was the prosecuting attorney for the case from Utah, was going to be the one that got to pick the attorney for Tyler Robinson. And I honestly think this was a misunderstanding, but I just wanted to put it out there because it just sounded kind of odd. Anyway, that's not the only thing that's odd in this case. There's a guy named Phil Lyman. He was a gubernatorial candidate for Utah. And he basically has interjected himself into this case. But not only has he interjected himself into the case, he's actually kind of a part of it in some ways because his family, the Lymans, live all the way around the university, or Utah Valley University. And if you remember the camera, the doorbell camera, that it had Tyler Robinson walking across the street and back across the street. It had him there at like 9 o'clock in the morning, walking one way, and then again, right before the shooting, or not too long before the shooting, I think it was 11:51, walking back across in front of that driveway. Well, Phil Lyman's car was actually one of the vehicles that was in the driveway of that doorbell camera. So that was one of his relatives' houses. Now, his nephew, Shaner Lyman, did a live stream video where he went out and was retracing the footsteps of Tyler Robinson. Now, these are the footsteps they believe that he took. But as he's doing this live stream video, his aunt pops on and she says something to the effect of, I wonder if the woman that was on the video, the camera, the doorbell camera with Tyler Robinson was an accomplice. Hold up. What in the heck is she talking about? The video that was released by the FBI did not have a woman in it that was talking to Tyler Robinson. But this woman, who is obviously related to the people that have the doorbell camera, knew that on that footage, that before it was edited, because obviously we got edited footage, there was a woman talking to Tyler Robinson prior to him going over to the university and allegedly shooting Charlie Kirk. So, who is this woman? And why didn't the FBI release that footage? So, was the FBI actually looking for this woman? Is she related to Tyler Robinson? Because obviously he was, if anybody knows anything about this case, Tyler Robinson lives 4 hours away from Utah Valley University. So, who is this woman talking to Tyler Robinson before he goes to do the shooting. Now, Candace Owens, I don't know if any of you are following her, but she's got a lot of conspiracy theories going on, and she doesn't believe that Tyler Robinson even committed the shooting. But after this, now she's questioning that. I still believe Tyler Robinson committed the shooting. I don't believe there was a broader conspiracy directed down from on high for Tyler Robinson to go do this. I believe there could have been a smaller conspiracy within his group that is related to the shooting. Him going out in there and shooting, did they help him? Did he have accomplices? Are there co-conspirators in this? Those things are possible. I believe that's absolutely certain. But none of the anomalies that are down there under the tent or that were going on in the quad, I don't think that you can relate those back to Tyler Robinson. And if you can't do that, then I don't believe there's a broader conspiracy in relationship with security or anything like that. But the oddity here is, and I don't want to lose this point, is that the FBI gave us edited footage and never mentioned this woman. Who is this woman? Who is she? Are they looking for her? Do they already know who she is? And then they, went ahead and removed her from the suspect list or removed her from the list of people that could possibly be co-conspirators? We don't know. Nobody knows anything about this. And that's as far as I could find. Nobody has any information on who this is. And the person that was there, the aunt of Shaner Lyman, which is, again, the nephew of Phil Lyman, she didn't know who it was either. She was just asking the question. But that question clearly opened up a whole can of worms here. Why is the FBI giving us edited footage? And if they're giving us edited footage, did they know that woman had something to do with this? Or were they looking into it and they didn't want her to get scared and go and hide or whatever so that she didn't know that she was on the camera? That's a possibility too, but we don't know any of that. We know that TMZ got the footage the day after the shooting. So they obviously had edited footage, or they were told they couldn't release that or whatever. We don't know that either. So who is this woman? Where did she come from? Why is she there? What is she talking to Tyler Robinson about? What are all these answers? This is just a ton of questions here. And another thing that's linked to this case that's just really odd. Now, I don't believe the FBI has covered up evidence intentionally because they're a part of a cover-up, but I believe that they are withholding evidence. Clearly, they're withholding evidence. This is an absolute here. And they've not yet shown us the pictures of the rounds. The shell casings had engravings on them. If we could see the shells, we would know, hey, is this a kind of bullet that gets obliterated when it hits its target? Now, generally, the bullets I was talking about before, which are frameable rounds, these rounds are designed to explode when you're shooting at steel targets so that you don't get that freaking blowback off of the steel targets and get hit with the fragments of the bullet that you just shot. They're supposed to scatter. So we know that Tyler Robinson's father said they went to the shooting range not too long before that. Is it possible that he had those rounds in there? Again, there's a lot of questions about this that have not yet been answered. But again, I don't want to assume that there's a broader conspiracy just because some of this evidence is being withheld from us. There could be good reasoning for it. But the woman in this case, as far as being on that doorbell camera and never being spoken of by the FBI, I think that's just odd. I think that's odd because if she was going to be related to the case, which we don't know, why haven't they spoken about her? Is there some kind of a search for her? Why didn't they put out, an APB on her or something like that? Why haven't they done any of this? These are good questions that have not yet been answered. I'm going to leave it with that on that one. There's really not much more I can go through on it because there isn't any more information out there to be found. I've looked repeatedly. But I do want to mention a couple more things, or at least one more thing in this case, the Alex Jones show. InfoWars, which was supposedly sold to The Onion back at a fraudulent auction that the judge threw out in court, has now had their case taken from federal and moved back to state. And what that has done, and if you're familiar with this at all, InfoWars was sued by the Sandy Hook families over some things that Alex Jones said and some other stuff that was said, and it was all garbage. Anything that he said that was incorrect, he went back and stated that he made a mistake on it, and he was retracting his statement. He did that. That's what you do in news, because sometimes you say things, you get things wrong. That's how it is. And I've already talked about that on my own live streams. But the truth of the matter is, in this case, they went and they got a judge down there in Texas and another one in Connecticut. It's a completely separate case. And they both found him guilty based on a clause that allows you to find someone guilty if they leave the state or they run away and they don't show up to court. So in civil court, you can actually find them guilty by default if they don't show up. Well, in this case, the judge demanded that Alex Jones produce evidence that didn't exist. So him and his attorneys couldn't produce this evidence, and the evidence was this. She demanded financial records and a scheme that he had developed to make money off of the Sandy Hook families. He never did any of that. So he couldn't produce that, and since he couldn't produce it, the judge found that he was guilty by default. And the only trial that he had was on how much he owed the families, not on whether or not he was guilty. In fact, he was not allowed to even say that he was not guilty in that phase of the trial where they were determining how much he owed the families. But back to what I was saying. Now that I gave you that little contextual update, the federal court sent it back to the state court as to allowing the state court judge, the one that found him guilty by default, to cause him to relinquish his assets. His assets at InfoWars are no longer protected, so it looks like they're going to be able to shut down the InfoWars website. They're going to be able to shut down the whole programming there at InfoWars. However, he does have a setup that's already been paid for. He actually had several people that had offered to do this for him prior to, but he decided against it because he did not want to lose the InfoWars name. He didn't want to give that up. But the Sandy Hook families and their Democrat attorneys and basically the George Soros money and whoever else is behind all this, Bloomberg, whatever, refused to settle in this case because he's already offered them up to $90 million. They wanted like $1.5 trillion, which I think is like the GDP of India or something astronomically ridiculous that he's never going to make in his entire lifetime or 20 lifetimes even. And he couldn't do that. They refused to settle for the 90-some million that he offered him over like 10, or offered them over like 10 years. So when they finally get this sent back, they tried to do an auction of InfoWars. They wanted to do it fraudulently because they didn't want any of his supporters to actually buy InfoWars so that he would be able to remain at the helm. And they fraudulently sold it to the Onion by allowing them to put up money the Sandy Hook families did not have based on the case that they had won against Alex Jones. So they were putting up fictitious money that was going to come at a later date from payments from Alex Jones. So he would literally be paying them to buy his business. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, and it's illegal. Hey, crazy, right? So the Onion didn't get to buy him because the judge saw what was going on, and they're like, yeah, you can't do that. It was a closed auction. It was supposed to be a cash auction where whoever offered the most money actually would get to buy InfoWars. Well, what they did is they did it a closed auction, and they allowed the Onion to purchase it fraudulently, giving or promising money that didn't even exist. So there's a highly likely chance, or a very good chance, and I would say that it's almost absolute at this point, that somewhere within the next 7 days, InfoWars is going to get shut down. Free speech system is going to get shut down. I think that's all a part of the same integrated system there. But Alex Jones is going to transfer over to his new studio, and it's going to be the same old program. It's just not going to be called InfoWars. I don't know exactly. I think it's just going to be the Alex Jones Show. I don't know exactly what it's going to be called anymore. That's going to come out. He had probably already said it. I just don't remember right off the top of my head at the moment. Those are the things I wanted to put out there tonight. A lot of crazy things going on. There's actually a lot more news, but I just can't come on here and do an hour or 2 hours. It takes a long time to just put all this together. You wouldn't think that it would, but unfortunately it does. And then I got to go home and edit, or I got to go back in the house and edit and clip this thing and put it all online. So, everybody have a good night. God bless.